Hey, everybody, welcome to Improv FAQ at Length. This is a series of longer conversations about improv topics that have lots of questions surrounding them. And for this episode, we're joined by our good friend, Jaclynn Cherry. Hey, Jaclynn.
Yay!
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So good to see you, Jaclynn.
Jaclynn is a friend of ours initially from the Metro Detroit improv community and moved to LA a few years ago. And the topic of conversation for this episode is going to be point of view, which is a topic that I love to talk about because I'll say up front that it's one that I don't really understand very much. It seems like such a powerful and useful tool for people who really get it or know how to use it. But I always have a lot of questions about it because I grapple with it. It's never been something that I could really get my mind around. So I'm excited to talk about it with you, Jaclynn. And maybe we can start with you selected the topic and what comes to mind for you? What made you want to talk about point of view?
Well, it's something that I've recently spent a lot of time studying. I just passed the intermediate level at Groundlings, and it's kind of like the basis of all of their character creation and improv. Not that I'm an expert at the Groundlings style or anything like that, but it's just something I've been focusing on personally and really learning from. So I thought it'd be a good thing to kind of dissect and talk about.
Cool. Yeah, so character point of view, my understanding of it is that, you know, it's an outlook on the world, the way that a character sees the world, and that is the driving force. It's pretty much like the character game in other terms, of what defines the character and what you can kind of just filter everything through while you're improvising. Does that line up with what we're talking about, Jaclynn?
Yeah, for sure. And there's different ways, there's different like terms that I've heard that help it kind of click better for certain people.
Okay.
Yeah, whether it's a filter or just like who you are as a person, your like descriptor. Yeah.
And how is it introduced in the Groundlings program as, you said it's kind of like a fixture or what do you call it? Like a leading principle of Groundlings approach to improv. How is it introduced in their classes?
I mean, at the basic level, it's just kind of like an understanding that humans and actual people are very complex. But when you're trying to just come up with a character, especially for the sake of like a comedic sketch, which is their ultimate kind of training, you just want to be able to know a character inside and out from the get-go. So picking one simple way of viewing the world and who this person is to the world is kind of how it's introduced. And it can be anything from just an adjective or what's the other term they use? I can't remember what it is, but like a phrase, like if there's a certain statement or phrase that kind of defines a character too.
Okay. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just, it helps everybody in an improv scene, or if you're writing, kind of figure out who is this person.
That's really cool.
And is it kind of, so I've heard people say like, what's my character's deal? That's pretty much what it is, right? What's this person's deal?
Yeah. It's definitely just like, what's this person's deal? So for example, like we'll get up and do a scene and you just kind of have to go up there and you do kind of do a little pre-planning, because the minute you get your suggestion and the scene starts, you have to have your point of view or your perspective. And so you can just in your head kind of say, I don't know, my character is whiny or something. And that just helps kind of build who you are and then how you react to all of your partner's stuff. And a big thing at Groundlings too is behavior. And so your point of view is exhibited through your character's behavior, whether it's some weird character tick you do physically, or a phrase you say all the time, or some sort of other behavior.
That's very Larry David, Curb Your Enthusiasm type stuff. Yeah.
And not to say that you're limited some people get kind of stuck in point of view, like, well, if my character is an optimist, then I'm happy all the time. And I think that's been the hardest thing for me to learn is like, no, an optimist can still feel sad or excited or afraid. It's just exhibited differently. Like if something sad is happening, an optimist is going to be like, well, I'm sad, but here's the silver lining, versus someone who's a pessimist, like, oh, well, the world's over now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's your balance, but something external can affect that. You can be an optimist 365 days a year, but the next day during a funeral, you might not feel as optimistic as you did the previous day. And that makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly.
Bob, is point of view something that you use in your toolkit or as a reliable thing?
Yeah, I love point of view because you think about all the short form games you played when you came up, like World's Worst and stuff like that. Those kind of statements you make during that can create a character so fast, and they're usually unique and unusual characters. So like a lot of the stuff I do, like with like date night and the longer form games, or even when I play with Chris and our 2-man, we do a mono scene. So you have to come in with a unique point of view. So if you had an skewed view of the world, that usually means you have an interesting character. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what makes today different. That's just the way you react to what makes today different is going to be unique.
Yeah, so it's curious to me because like it's probably something I would benefit a lot from getting the exercise reps in on, because I feel like we're very attuned to figuring out the who, what, where of the scene and the game of the scene, and these things that are kind of either external or like more a combination of things that are going on. And so point of view is more of an internal choice. And I love the idea of being like, okay, what's this character's like life motto or values? But it's especially if I am like in a character, I tend to try to like kind of try to balance myself and like not be too internal if I'm like feeling fired up about like being in a character mode, and so I'll like, I don't know, what I would probably benefit from in those situations instead of checking in too quickly about everything that's going on outside is to be like, let me just get a real quick third dimension on this character so I'm not just cartoony through the whole scene or show here, and go like, why is this character this way, or what's an interesting reason for this character to be this way? Because I do that externally of like, if we're in a talking head scene, I will absolutely be like, oh, where are these characters probably at face value, and where would it be interesting for them to be or not make sense for them to be? So I've trained myself to kind of like quickly think of those things in a way that doesn't distract me from participating in the scene, but it makes me nervous when I'm like, oh, I'm this fun character and I'm going to go inside and I feel like I'm like ignoring everything. But the truth is, it would probably just get that out of the way and allow me to receive and interact with things in the scene that much more if I took care of it earlier.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, Jaclynn, like, I think this is something you were always good at, just from my, like, from the outside looking in, because I always think of you as a character performer, like all the stuff you did with like Natural Born Killers and stuff like that. Like that's a very character heavy show, whether it's like you during the Weird Ass when you're doing the monologue scenes or monologue performance into the longer scenes. I don't know. Was this an easy portion of the training when out there, or I don't know. Was it easy, or was it something you connected to easily? I guess that is what I'm asking.
Well, thank you, first of all. I actually, like James mentioned up top, I kind of found myself struggling when I was, first going through improv and then trying to progress through different programs. I found that I was like playing myself a lot and trying to break that habit of like, it's okay to play this unlikable character and double down on it because you're just playing a character. And so I used to have this bad habit of like, I'd start with this really strong character or like idea, and it was really fun. And then eventually I would like match the other person and kind of conform to them. And so what this POV thing and the Groundlings training has really like kicked my butt into doing is like sticking with my point of view and sticking with that character and why. And it ultimately makes the scene more fun rather than like me caving and giving up on what I had created. Yeah. And I mean, the training there is a little different, just because like they're big on right at the top within the first 3 lines of the scene, you get out the who, what, where, and it's all for the purpose of just like getting that information out of the way so you can play as characters in this world. But I've just learned so much that can be taken into any form, whether it's short form, which I do pretty consistently, or long form. And I find myself like, oh, I haven't played this kind of character in a while. And so I'll challenge myself before I set, like not pre-planning a whole character, but maybe just like, I'm going to try playing an angry character today. And then maybe this kind of character. I think the biggest thing that I also enjoy is like realizing you can play a range of POV too. Like you can play a people pleaser at a 1, and then you can also play one at a 10. And so 1 is going to be a little more grounded, and 10 is going to be over the top, but it's still rooted in a human trait, I guess.
Yeah, I like that. Mm-hmm. Well, because I like playing it at 10, not 100% of the time, obviously, but when you do those kind of things, the audience asks why. Why is this person like this? So it makes your POV something interesting, and when they ask why, like if you can provide that, that's incredible.
Yeah, and I think the behavior thing that I feel like I'm all over the place trying to talk quarantine brain, but the behavior thing, has been really key for me too. Like one of our exercises, we'd always have homework between all of the weeks, and one was to think of someone you know and something they do. And I don't want to call out the person that I used as an example, but we all know and love her. And like just taking a character trait that someone does and just doing it over and over and like walking around your living room doing that thing, like it helps you get into this character. And then it's like, well, what would this character's POV be? And then I found a whole character just from this one person that I know, like their physical tic. And then the final like test at the intermediate level at Groundlings is you do five characters through the door, and you have a minute each. And I ended up using that as a character. So I love this topic because you can find a character out of anything, whether it's physical, emotional, a phrase, an adjective, anything at all.
Well, yeah. So let's talk about there's a few things that I want to check your perspective on it, because one, I'm curious, like, maybe 2 major ways are like you can either start with behavior and then figure out the point of view from there, or start with that POV and be like, okay, well, what kind of behavior does that lead to? Do you use it from both approaches, or do you or like either the Groundlings teaching or your preference? Do you prefer to like start with behavior and figure out point of view, or start with point of view and attach behavior to it?
I would say I go both ways. When you're in class, it's kind of a different beast, because you have certain things you're working on or certain exercises. But then as I've used that in some of my sets that I've performed, sometimes you're just attacking the stage because nobody's out there. And then you're like, okay, I guess I'll come up with something, and then I'll come up with a behavior. And then, okay, this is my character now. She goes like this. And then sometimes you're on the back line like, I have a thematic idea.
Goes like this. I love it.
I mean, that's...
but really, yeah.
But really,
it works.
We know this person. This is,
Yeah. But you're saying otherwise you can maybe pick a thematic element of the show?
It just, I think different situations call for different things. Depending on the style of your troupe or form, or whether it's fast or slower. I'm not saying like that POV is the end all be all. Like you still have to take care of your teammates and all that stuff, but it's definitely one like tool in the tool belt that's come to the forefront for me.
It seems like something that can be very elemental to strong improv, like Who, What, Where, or Game of the Scene. It seems like a very those two things are not, like I said, they tend to be external or in combination of elements. But point of view seems to be very character driven and start internally. It almost kind of reminds me of like the annoyance, take care of yourself first approach. And that is definitely a powerful tool. And yeah, you are one of the building blocks of a scene. So to make a powerful choice and a clear, well-defined choice is going to help the rest of the scene in combination once you apply it to the rest. And yeah, of course, you got to tend to the rest. But like as a starting point, it's got to be, yeah, absolutely a really strong building block.
Mm-hmm.
What do you? So you mentioned that like you kind of think of, okay, I haven't played this type of character before, and I'm just kind of curious, like what are sort of types or hues of character that you think of? Is it more about like emotional energy? I'm playing like a negative or conflict character, or is it more like like what are some of like the basic things that you start with when you think of like, am I kind of playing my range in types of characters? Is it physicality? Is it like what? I guess what comes to mind first when I ask that?
Yeah, I would say I used to always kind of lead with emotion, and then after a while that kind of stalls out. Like, okay, well, this is now who am I though? Like just because I'm feeling this one thing, and so I've kind of shifted. And I guess I always kind of tended to play, if you've got a neutral character, I used to always kind of play the more positive, the peppy, likable characters.
Yeah.
But it can be really fun to dip into the other side or I guess I think of it more as like status or perceived status. So if you're playing, I guess one extreme would be like, I'm the most important, best person in the world. And then the other extreme would be, the world is against me, don't talk to me.
Right.
And then there's so much in between too. Like it's kind of fun to explore those, maybe not as specific or extreme people, but like one of my like 5 through the door characters for Groundlings was just someone who's like really sure of herself. And that's kind of like in the middle, but it was still really fun to play. Like no matter what, like, oh, nope, it's fine. Yep, I'm cool. It's great. I don't know if any of that's making sense, but yeah, I would say like, I kind of think of like POV in terms of perceived status. Like, how does this person feel about the world? And
what do they think their place is in it? Like,
right. Yeah. But that I guess people that, I don't know, I guess your actual status and like how you view can always be different too. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like that because you guys were talking about just picking a random emotion and leading with that. That can be tricky because it might not fit something might happen external in the scene that affects your character. So you have to drop that emotion. So you drop the thing that you led with. If you enter with a point of view, you can change emotionally, but you still have that point of view. So I think it's a little stronger platform to launch from. I like that. That's really, I never thought of it. That's cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess like, I don't know, not that I have to keep talking about my experience at Groundlings, but it's just
please.
so fresh.
Yeah, we don't get a lot of exposure on that.
Yeah. That's so cool.
Halfway through the term, my teacher was like, okay, like, we get it, Jaclynn, you can play a low status character. So I guess I tended to play kind of the like defeated character or the like, I don't know, the world's against me characters. And yeah, like if your POV is everyone's out to get me or no one likes me, you can, the general overarching, I guess, emotion there is like sad. But then when a character like that has a victory or does like stand up for themselves in a situation, then like that's the part that the audience goes crazy for. Like, oh, this person that like we can relate to just had a win. And like the behavior that goes along with that person having a win is what's funny. And that's what, like, ultimately the goal is comedy. And so that's where kind of the funny comes from, not just like snapping out of it and being like, I'm the best, I win. But like, how does this defeated character celebrate like a tiny victory? Like, that's the funny part.
That's awesome. So when you're picking the point of view, do you get specific? Like, so like you just said, like, oh, the world's against me. Do you do stuff like the world's against me because my beard's too gray? You know, like something that specific, or do you want to just kind of keep it a little bit more open so you can have a little more discovery?
I think a balance of both. If you're going in with like a pre-planned kind of character in a sketch situation, then yeah, you've got these fleshed out characters. But in improv, you kind of don't really have that kind of time. And so it's real, and it's fun to discover that in the moment. So if we're in a scene and I'm playing this defeated character, and then, you know, you put on a CD or something, and a song either makes me light up or downward spiral, like the fun is discovering why. Like, oh, well, that song was playing when I got broken up with last. And so then your reaction and your behavior is like to go one direction or the other.
That's cool.
Yeah. And then that informs your character more.
Yeah. So then, again, I'm kind of just making the analogies in my head of like, what are your goals with Who, What, Where, Game of the Scene? And in Who, What, Where, you got to have your lines that establish those things. And it sounds like POV is about why, the why behind behavior. And so, like, yeah, just training yourself to make establishing lines that are like, oh, I did something that I don't understand yet. Do you kind of just be like, all right, now I got to say something that explains it, and I'll see what comes out? Like, is that the solution some of the times, or are you like, oh, let me hang on to that and wait, and once I kind of like process it, then I can reveal it or whatever? Do you, or is it kind of like depends on the situation?
I think it depends on the situation, but it's really fun to just react. And that's generally where like the funny comes from. And I think then having to justify it is even more fun. Like, oh, I just reacted to this thing. Now, like, you know, specifics and details are where the fun really comes. So yeah, just making up a justifiable or justifying that reaction is important, but not, I don't think it's as important as the reaction itself.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That's awesome. I love it.
What about for you, Bob? When you think of like whether if you're kind of keeping track of the energies that you're playing in a show, or the types of characters that you're playing in a show, or lately in the times that you get on stage, how do you think about like, man, I've been doing too much of this type of character or not enough of these types of characters? What is it that you're thinking of in types? Is it energy levels? Is it emotions? Is it physicalities?
All those things. Emotion, like I consider that a category. The level at which I play or range I play that emotion, I consider that a level. And then the why is a separate category. So if I'm playing the hype man in the first couple of scenes, well, I gotta get rid of that energy because the audience already seen that. So I gotta do something that's not happy because hype is happy. Go to something more depressive. Also play lower or maybe mid, depending on what everybody else, you know. And it really depends on how many people are in the scene too. Because if it's that like everybody enjoys something, and I've already done something or two scenes where I enjoy everything as well, I try to play the opposite. Or maybe I think comedically that might work better to have the one person on the island who doesn't like being on the island. So I'll choose that. Like, but I've done it so often. Yeah, I make these decisions really quick, and sometimes even before I even realize I made them, and I just jump into it. You know, mostly my gut tells me what to do now, and I just follow that, and it works out most of the time.
I like my gut.
I like my gut.
Do you guys think about like okay, so in the conversation of POV, how do you think about whether you're playing a straight character or the odd character, or does that line kind of blur and really just depend on like you said, am I a people pleaser at a 1 or a 10? Probably the more intense of a character you are, the less you are of a straight character. But when you were Jaclynn, when you were talking about like not playing close to self, like, can you still have a strong character that is very close to self? And like, what does it take if it's going to be close to self? How do you kind of like talk about character in terms of straight versus the odd character?
Yeah. I think it definitely depends on, I get when you're talking like straight versus the more out there character. Sometimes it also just depends on what your scene partner decides too, because there's something fun, like, you know, if Bob and I enter a scene and we're playing opposites, then you kind of figure out like, okay, well, who's the more grounded of the two. And sometimes you end up being kind of the same POV, and then that's delightful. Whether you're both kind of the more grounded or the more out there. I think with like playing close to yourself, it's easy to do because we're just up there making stuff up. And I find that in order to be successful, you kind of just have to pick one thing about yourself. Like, because I mean, we all have traits about us that are real and what other people might portray too. But as I said before, like every human is more complex than like one POV. So just picking one trait, like I am an optimist generally. I am very detailed generally. And so picking just one of those and kind of exaggerating that trait about yourself can be fun.
Do you end up with like less in the Groundlings playing style? Do you in classes or in shows that you've seen there, do you end up with less strictly straight characters that seem to be playing like just themselves, the voice of the audience, normal person who's like, what is wrong with you? You're usually getting combinations of stronger characters?
I would say yes, because ultimately their goal in training you is to eventually write comedic sketch shows. I mean, they do improv shows too, but you watch those and it's like everyone is playing a character. They all are generally grounded in something, but they're usually at a 10, or at least that's the goal. So yeah, there would rarely be just like a grounded talking head scene. But that's just because that's their style, I think.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm more curious that like straight character as a backboard or contrast can be a really powerful tool to highlight how, you know, the unusual characteristics of a character. But I guess I was just curious, like, if that is a tool, or if it's like, no, we don't need that. We trust the audience to like, you know what normal is. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because I think that's kind of tricky too, to navigate. Like, I'm driving my POV, you're driving your POV, and of course there's a way to make that work. But a simple tool, I imagine, would be that like this person's driving their POV and this person is the neutral character, to let this person kind of like go nuts and this person be the anchor to the scene. But yeah, is that just, that's less of a concern for Groundlings? It's like, no, we're going to be both characters and find our way together.
I guess when I think about the short form I've seen there, it's very, the characters are definitely like up a notch. But when I think of the more long form, like they'll do their like late night long form show is they improvise a movie. And yeah, I've definitely seen someone kind of take that more neutral character to exaggerate the world around them and the characters around them. Yeah, I think that's a helpful tool all the time. But I think the trap we fall into is when you're like, oh, I'm just playing the straight character. Like, that person can still have a POV and thoughts about the world. They're just not maybe as extreme as the other characters.
Yeah, straight character doesn't mean apathetic or indifferent.
Right. And
I'll
admit
it
that's
could
the
be,
trap I fall into. Like,
yeah.
okay, well, I'll just be this pinball that doesn't know where to go. It's like, no, if you just stick to something, it'll only help everyone else too.
I think people think the straight man has to be boring, but like you watch stuff like the Odd Couple or the dynamic of the two main characters and the producers. Like the straight man can be more interesting because this situation's crazy, and sometimes the eccentric can deal with crazy a lot better than the straight man. And where is his breaking point? And then we get to see, oh man, this dude just snapped. That's usually so much fun. I think about like Gene Wilder and the producers, like when he loses it, it's fantastic and probably one of the most interesting dynamics of that movie. So I think playing the straight man could be a lot of fun if you allow yourself to really get emotionally, I don't know, not charged, but like invested into the scene.
Yeah, and it's your reactions that really sell what the other people are doing too. It's all about reacting, really. If we want to talk acting, no, I'm kidding.
No, please.
But it's so true because if you don't care, the audience. I don't want to take credit for this, but the audience like wants to see two things and will react to two things, and that's importance and details. So if this crazy character is giving you all this comedy gold and all these details and things, and you're just like, man, that's not cool, that's not important, then like you've dropped it. But if you can make those things important, then it's beautiful.
That's awesome. I love that importance and detail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I like what you said, Bob, too, about the odd character having a hard time being in reality or like dealing with normal, but then the straight character has a hard time dealing with crazy. So depending on what the backdrop is or the situation, either one could be suited. It could flip at any moment to be like, which one of us is really out of our element here?
Right.
Yeah, especially if the characters care about each other. Like if the straight, there's that whole Dharma and Greg dynamic. Like she's very eccentric, hippy dippy, and he's very straight laced, black suit, tight tie every day, and he's just got to deal with her shit because he loves her, and it made for an interesting dynamic.
Totally.
Most of my improv notes come from sitcoms or movies.
I know. I was like, "There's a throwback."
Yeah,
same. I was like, "Oh man, because my mind always goes to like Will and Grace as that era. That was the same era, right?
Right.
Dharma and Greg was another gem.
Yeah,
it still hits.
It's different. Like I'll watch shows that are character driven now and really like, oh, what, and like really try to dissect like what is funny about this or what's driving this, or like I'll watch SNL and be like, oh, I get where these characters came from a little more now. It's kind of changed that. So yeah, maybe I need to do a little Dharma and Greg rewatch.
There you go.
Take some
Character
notes.
study from Dharma and Greg.
Dharma and Greg watch party, baby.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, going back to that importance and details thing you had asked before, like, is it when you're in the moment and you react to something, you've just made it important, and then the fun comes from the details of why it's important. And so that's, I think, what I was trying to say in more eloquently, and it didn't come out right. But
wow, I thought it was a very valuable, useful way to phrase it in the first place. But that just takes it another step further. Is the importance is the way you react, how you're treating things, and then the detail is in the explanation. That's I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you spend any time at Pack Theater in LA?
I've seen a handful of shows, but I haven't done much of anything there. No, I just know people involved.
There's a really interesting curriculum at, or I guess it's basically Miles Stroth's philosophy, which is like the 4 scene types. One of them is a straight odd relationship, and another. I think it's like alternate reality. 'Cause I was just kind of thinking of like Bob, what you said where you got the eccentric going into the tougher situation and can deal with it better than the straight character. It's
Right.
almost like normal is relative, right? And so a straight character is a really great tool. Also, changing your backdrop is a really great tool. And I think that like where this rambling diatribe is going is that I'm wondering about like situation and environment for character work. Like for you guys, how much do you you said for Groundlings you try to establish the who, what, where right away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so like whether at Groundlings or anywhere else, if you find that you are this, bonkers character, not bonkers, but like intense character, how much do you use the backdrop or the context to kind of like highlight that? Or if you establish the location and what's going on first and you haven't really made a strong character choice or there's a lot of wiggle room for you to develop it, like how much do you play off of the backdrop of the scene to boost your character? Or does that come into play?
I mean, it's easier said than done, but in a perfect world, the environment is all wrapped up in everything you're doing. 'Cause in the real world, it would be, if we're having a scene or a conversation out in public versus at home or anything like that.
Right.
But I try to challenge myself to use the environment to keep myself present. Instead of talking about something, like pick that thing up and care about it, give it importance or detail. Or if you're feeling emotional in a scene, use what's around you or what you've already established. If you're decorating cakes, and you get angry, decorate the cake instead of just talking about it.
Yeah, I guess I would
easier said than done.
Totally.
No.
Well, I would imagine at Groundlings you probably have a lot more of the realistic environment, just realistic scene work in general, right? My understanding is that they tend to stick a little bit more to close to reality.
Yeah, it's like come out, do an activity that two people would do.
Okay. And then I'm kind of curious, outside of that realm, though, when you do have, stuff in fantasy world or sci-fi world, I think a really nice thing to go back to, which I got to make sure that I write that down, is the importance and detail thing, because your environment is something to react to as well, or react through, a way for you to, if you're going to pick something up, that's how you're kind of expressing your characters, how you're interacting with your environment behavior. But if it's outlandish, and you're like an alien, how much do you or I guess maybe I'm just trying to think of
Well, if it's outlandish and you're the alien, then that's normal for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Because I'm always so just real quick, Bob, just because I know I'm going on a bunch of little tangents here, but I guess my thing is that I have a hard time with POV as a starting place, and I'm trying to think of ways that I can kind of match it with some of the things that I go to, which is often just about contrast, period. I try to operate on I think less about character and more about what is being contrasted here. And so I'm just trying to think of all these different ways that starting with point of view can be thought about or treated or used in a way that's a little bit more familiar to me, is kind of where my head's at. Sorry to cut you off, Bob.
Oh no, you're good. You're good. But I mean, if you're thinking contrast, you can pick a point of view that's contrast to what you thought was going to be the initiation, and just stick to that. I guess. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but yeah. I mean, like those games, I talked about before, Things You Never Hear or World's Worst. Those are two games that I don't know. They're exercises, if you will, that promote having a skewed point of view using just one line of dialogue or action or physicality. So I think starting there is a great place.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then so sketch writing and development, Jaclynn, like you're is it more of a workshop feel then when you're doing is like, oh, we want to improvise to find these characters?
I mean, I haven't really gotten to that level of anything yet. I've only taken 2 classes there. So right now it's just the improv focus.
Gotcha.
With the caveat that, like, yeah, we're doing character driven improv, and generally, like, sometimes that becomes more important than the improv itself. Not to say they promote bad improv, but, like, sometimes it's like, okay, well, like, that wasn't a great scene, but, like, keep that character, that was great.
Totally.
Where other schools, it's very, like, the focus is the improv, and character is just one tool to use within it. Yeah, I wouldn't say it feels that much different from a normal class. But yeah, where I've really, like, taken it elsewhere is I perform at a couple other theaters in the area. And that's where I've really been able to kind of implement what I've learned in a normal improv set.
Cool.
Yeah.
I get this question a lot from students who struggle with creating character. How do you feel about having, like, I don't know, I guess for lack of a better term, like, go-to characters? Not that you have to go to them all the time, but, you know, just characters that you've workshopped and just have in your arsenal if need be.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we all do it, whether we admit it or not. I probably have, like, 3 that I play a lot more than I should. So I don't think it's a bad thing to kind of flesh those out and maybe analyze, like, well, why am I playing this type of character so much? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? But just also know that there are so many other versions of you to explore too. But I think we all kind of default to those characters that we know work. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, if you know a character is going to do great, I mean, you can always change. Having the same POV in 5 different improv sets is going to look different depending who you're with, what environment you're in, those importance and details, like, well, why am I this way? It's going to be different every time. So I don't think it's cheating.
You can even do the reverse. Like, say you're playing that improviser that we all love, and you change her point of view. Like, what would that world be like? Mm-hmm. You know, what if she went through a Batman type situation? You know, like, that's cool. You know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the fun can come from seeing those characters in different situations.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, where they might be high status one place and low status the other. Yeah, it's all because ultimately it's about that, the behavior and the reactions, and it's all rooted in the POV. There's
still discovery.
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably what it comes down to is like can you play that character flexibly, or, you know, are you shoehorning it into things? And if you can't, then you should either find ways to make that character flexible or find new characters in those situations where your Rolodex of characters don't fit smoothly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, if you're trying to force, I mean, and we kind of learn this in basics, like, don't try to force your own narrative or your own plot, but knowing who you are isn't forcing anything. It's just as long as you stick with it.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, if you're playing the same character and it's always in the same situation, then it might not be that strong of a character in the first place, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Knowing, having that decision or definition for yourself internally doesn't mean you have to word vomit your backstory or do your. I think that's another thing when it comes to, like,
don't deny. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I'm a pilot. Like, I think
it matters. It matters.
Yeah. I can't garden. I'm a pilot. Thanks. But I think that if you're using character types in improv a lot. Like, don't rely on the same bits. Like, if your character is kind of driven on like catchphrases or go to things that they reference or say, it's too much of a crutch, I think. But if the point of view is flexible enough to filter anything through, then you have a really strong character that can probably live in any improv scene. I suppose would be the goal is kind of what we said early on in the conversation, right? Is that like when you're writing, you want to be able to put this character in any situation and know how they're going to respond. And if you have a character like that, then in improv, that's a malleable character. If your character's kind of locked into bits, it's probably not one that you want to just be chucking into sets just as a hoot.
Yeah. And I will fully admit that I've done it. Like,
we've all done it.
I've done a really fun scene with Mike, and like, I'm in a class, like nervous to perform, like, I'll just do that one really funny character, and then it tanks because you're not present, you're not thinking. You're like, no, I'm gonna play this football player, and it doesn't work. Yeah.
Remember the football player?
Right, guys.
Come on, we all know football.
So take it from me, don't do that.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think this is a good place to wrap it up, and I kid you not, I have learned plenty from this conversation, and I'm so glad, because I think that is the point of these conversations is to come into it with talking about topics that we don't always have the answers for, and POV is definitely something that I have always thought was a mystery to me, and talking with you about it has given me a lot of really great things to now I'm like, I want to do that. I want to like make sure that I'm that reacting and kind of putting a because on things and get opportunities to do that. So thanks for talking with us.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Glad that you're well, and hope to talk again soon.
Thank you.
Good seeing you.
This was great.
Thank you.